Okay, so I had some of you still having some issues over the homework last night, or really last night and the night before last. So digital day, I want to say this was what, Monday and Friday's homework. Okay, so first of all, what I've done is I've just picked some problems from the homework and I've worked them out on a piece of paper for you, and we're just going to go over those. So it says here to simplify and state the excluded values. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take that 18n over 18n squared. Now, basically what you're going to do is find the highest value that will divide into both 8 and 18, which is 2. So what I've done is I've taken the factors of 8n, which is 2 times 4 and then n, and then I've taken the factors of 18n squared, which is 2 times 9, and then n and n for the n squared. I've canceled out the 2's, and I've canceled out one n, and what we're left with is 4 over 9n. So I've wrote that out. So we've simplified this down for as low as it can go, because there's not a value that will divide both into 4 and into 9. But what you have to do here, if you remember, I said n cannot equal a value that will make my denominator 0. And the reason why is anytime you have a fraction or a division problem where your denominator or your divisor or your dividend is 0, it is it's undefined. And I'm sorry, I said dividend, I meant divisor. But it's an undefined value. So in other words, let's just say, okay, we see here I solved for n and it equals 0. So let's see what happens when I make n equals 0. So if we look at my calculator here, I'm going to put in 4 and then divided by 9. Actually, I need to put that. Let's do it as a fraction. Alpha y equals 1. And then in our numerator, we're going to put our 4, and then in the denominator, we're going to put 9, and instead of putting in or an x, I'm going to put in times 0. Okay, so we know 9 times 0 is 0, so it's going to be 4 times 0, and when I hit that, it's going to say, you know, the buzzer's going to go off and say, no, you can't do that, you know, and the reason why is because you can't divide. Our error here is that you can't divide by a 0. So that's what we mean by the word excluded values. We have to exclude 0 from the possible values that can be in. So what you have to do in these problems is take that denominator, set it to equal 0, and then solve and say, okay, at what value will n equal 0? So when n equals 0 here, so 9n equals 0, divide by 9, 0, divide by 9 is 0. So 4 over 9n, except n cannot equal 0 in this case. So we're just saying this is simplified, but know that n cannot equal 0. Okay, so number 2, I did the same thing. I know my factors of 40 are 4 times 10. My factors of 28 are 4 times 7. So you don't want to use 2 times 20 and 2 times 14 because those are not your highest common factor. Remember, you got to find that highest common factor. Then I said n, and then for 3 n's, we put 3 n's here. So we see here we could cancel out that 4 and cancel out 2 of the n's with 1 remaining. So now what we have is 10 over 7n. That will not simplify anymore, but we've got to find that excluded value. So we're going to do that by saying 7n equals 0, divide each side by 7, and 0 divided by 7 is 0. So our answer is going to be 10 over 7n, and n cannot equal 0. Now, these are just simple monomials divided by monomials. So here we see we have a trinomial, n squared plus 8n minus 9, divided by the binomial 10n cubed minus 10n squared. So we're going to deal with this trinomial first. So I'm going to factor that. Now factoring goes back to when we were working on the quadratic. So you've got to know how to do your factoring here. If you don't, then you need to reach out to me and I'll send you some videos to remind you how to factor. But that's something we learned earlier this year. And I said, okay, guys, factoring does not go away. And we see here it does not. So we see here that our third term is a negative. So we've got to take our factors of our negative, which is a positive and a negative. Then we're going to take that n squared and break it up to n and n, and then factors of 9, which is 9 and 1. Now we know the 9 goes behind the positive because our middle term is positive here. Okay, so n squared plus 8n minus 9 factors out to n plus 9 times n minus 1. Now next we have the binomial 10n cubed minus 10n squared, and we're going to factor out our GCF. Now first look at your number, and we see 10 is in both, so I'm going to factor out that 10. And then we have an n cubed and an n squared, so you're going to factor out the highest power, which is the n squared. Now, just a reminder, the way we get the inside here is by taking that 10n cubed minus 10n squared and dividing it by what we factored out. So we divided them both by 10n squared. So 10n cubed divided by 10n squared is n, because you subtract the exponents. And then 10n squared divided by 10n squared is 1. It doesn't just cancel out, it is 1. So what we're left with here is n plus 9 times n minus 1 over 10n squared times n minus 1, and you just cancel out those n minus 1s. So don't forget though, we have to take each of these factors and set them to equal 0. Even though these are going to cancel and we're going to have just the n plus 9 over 10n squared, you do have to go through the steps by taking the 10n squared equals 0, divide by 10, and n squared equals 0, square root both sides, n equals 0. Then we're going to take the n minus 1 and set it to equal 0 and solve for n. Add your 1 to both sides and n equals 1. And these two will be your excluded values, and this will be your simplified answer. So your answer is n plus 9 over 10n squared, provided that n does not equal 0 and 1.